The Ghost of What Was. Jake Williams stared at the ceiling of his modest apartment as rain pattered against the windows. The man who once owned penthouses and drove luxury vehicles now lived in a space barely larger than the walk-in closets he used to have. His empire had crumbled like sand through his fingers with each failed investment and poor business decision. The irony wasn't lost on him that losing his money felt less devastating than losing her. He rolled out of bed at midnight, unable to sleep again. The insomnia had become his constant companion ever since the final divorce papers were signed 3 years ago. He wandered to the kitchen and poured himself a glass of water, staring at his reflection in the darkened microwave window. A stranger looked back at him, someone hollow and broken, someone unrecognizable from the confident young man who had once conquered boardrooms and accumulated wealth beyond measure. The memories felt sharper lately. Maybe it was age creeping in, or maybe it was the weight of regret finally becoming too heavy to ignore. He thought about Emily Parker, the girl he had loved since high school, the girl who believed in him when he was nobody, the girl who stood by him as he climbed higher and higher into the world of business. But somewhere along the way, he had forgotten about her. He had traded quiet moments for important meetings, replaced her embrace with the thrill of closing deals, dismissed her concerns about their marriage as distractions from success. She had tried to reach him countless times, begging him to remember who they were together. But Jake was too intoxicated by his own ambition to notice the woman beside him withering away. Emily had finally given him an ultimatum: choose the empire or choose her. Jake chose wrong. He chose the money, the power, the endless pursuit of more. And Emily chose to leave. She packed her things on a Tuesday morning and walked out of his life forever. The divorce proceedings were brutal and ugly. Words were said that could never be unsaid. She had accused him of loving his bank account more than her, and he had coldly responded that she was ungrateful for everything he had given her. Now, at nearly midnight, Jake found himself standing at the window, watching cars pass by on the empty street below. He felt something stirring within him, a desperate longing for something real, for something that money could never buy, an ache in his chest that grew heavier with each passing day. He knew he had to do something to break this cycle of despair. On impulse, he grabbed his jacket and keys. He didn't know where he was going until he was already behind the wheel, driving through the dark streets toward his hometown. He hadn't been back in years. This small town held too many memories, too many ghosts of who he used to be. But something was pulling him there, some inexplicable force that whispered Emily in his mind. As he drove, he thought about the man he had become, the man Emily had fallen in love with, and the man she had learned to hate. They say hindsight is 20/20, and Jake was finally seeing everything with perfect clarity. He saw how blind he had been, how selfish and arrogant. He saw the moment in 1,000 different moments, when he could have chosen differently, when he could have chosen love. The rain grew heavier as he navigated the familiar roads, and by the time he saw the blinking neon sign of Mel's Diner, his heart was pounding in his chest. He wasn't sure what he expected to find, but he felt drawn to this place, as if fate itself was guiding him through the night. He parked and stared at the diner for a long moment, building up courage, reminding himself that he had nothing to lose because he had already lost everything that mattered. Then he pushed open the door and stepped inside.
The moment everything changes. The diner was nearly empty at this late hour, only a few scattered customers occupying the worn booths. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everything in a harsh white glow that made the space feel cold and unwelcoming. Jake moved slowly toward an empty booth near the window, his eyes scanning the room, searching for her. Then he saw her. Emily Parker emerged from the kitchen carrying a tray of food, and Jake felt his breath catch in his throat. Time seemed to stop in that singular moment. She was heavily pregnant, her belly round and full beneath the faded pink waitress uniform. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she moved with a careful grace despite her obvious exhaustion. But what struck him most was her face. She looked older somehow, weary in a way that spoke of sleepless nights and endless struggles. She delivered the food to another table with a warm smile, and Jake felt his heart shatter all over again. This was his Emily, the woman he had promised to cherish and protect. Yet here she was, working the graveyard shift at a dingy diner, pregnant and alone. He could see the weariness etched into every line of her face, the burden she carried on her shoulders. Every detail of her appearance screamed of a life far harder than any she should have had to endure. Jake suddenly felt sick. The guilt crashed over him like a tidal wave threatening to drown him. He had done this. He had created the circumstances that led to this moment. His choices, his arrogance, his obsession with wealth and status had directly resulted in Emily being here, serving food at midnight while carrying another man's child. The realization was almost unbearable. Emily turned then, and their eyes met across the diner. Her face went pale. She froze completely, her tray nearly slipping from her hands. 1,000 emotions flickered across her features. Shock, confusion, pain, disbelief. She stared at him for what felt like an eternity before her professional mask slipped back into place. She took a breath, steadied herself, and began walking toward him. Jake stood up awkwardly, not sure whether to embrace her, shake her hand, or simply apologize profusely. Emily approached the booth with cautious, measured steps. Her hand instinctively moved to her belly, a protective gesture that made Jake's throat tighten. "Hello, Jake," she said, her voice soft and controlled, but trembling slightly. "I never expected to see you here." He struggled to find words, any words. "I came back to town. I needed to think, and I just drove here without really knowing why. It's good to see you," he managed, though the phrase felt absurdly inadequate. Emily shifted her weight, clearly uncomfortable. She looked down at her uniform, then back at him. Her eyes searched his face, as if looking for the man she once knew. "Is it, though?" she asked quietly. Before Jake could respond, Emily seemed to remember her training, her job. She gestured to the booth. "You want to sit? I can get you something to drink." Her professionalism was like a wall between them, a barrier she had constructed to protect herself. Jake nodded numbly. As Emily turned to leave, he noticed how slowly she moved, how she placed one hand on her lower back, as if in pain. The pregnancy looked difficult, and she looked exhausted to her bones. When she returned with his coffee, her hands shook slightly as she poured. "How are you, Emily?" he asked, desperately trying to bridge the impossible gap between them. "I'm doing fine," she said, but her voice cracked slightly. "I'm managing." He wanted to ask so many things. Who was the father? Where was he? Why wasn't he here helping her? But he had no right to ask. He had forfeited that right years ago when he chose his empire over her. As Emily turned to walk away, Jake reached out and gently touched her wrist. The contact sent electricity through both of them. Their eyes met again, and in that moment all the pain, all the love, all the betrayal surfaced between them like a haunting specter. "Wait," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "We need to talk." Emily pulled her hand away gently, but firmly. "Maybe we do," she replied. "But not tonight, Jake. Not like this." She walked away, leaving him alone with his cold coffee and the crushing weight of his regrets.
Wounds reopened. Emily finished her shift at 2 in the morning, her feet throbbing and her back screaming with pain. She changed out of her uniform in the cramped employee bathroom, catching sight of herself in the cracked mirror. She looked exhausted, worn down by life in a way she never imagined she would be back in her high school days, when she dreamed of becoming a teacher. Instead, she was a waitress at a late-night diner, working double shifts just to afford a small apartment and prepare for the baby coming in 3 months. Jake Williams. It was impossible that he had walked back into her life right when she was at her lowest point. After 3 years of rebuilding herself, after 3 years of learning to be strong and independent and self-sufficient, he appeared like some ghost come to haunt her. She had thought she was over him. She had convinced herself that the love she once felt had died along with their marriage.
But seeing him, sitting in that booth, looking like a shadow of his former self, had awakened something in her. A dangerous something she could not afford to feel right now. She packed up her belongings and headed toward the exit when she heard his voice. "Emily, wait." She stopped and closed her eyes, steeling herself before turning around. Jake was standing in the dim hallway near the diner entrance. He looked desperate and vulnerable, and Emily hated how her heart still responded to the sight of him. "You can't keep running from this," he said, moving closer. His voice was different now, stripped of the arrogant confidence she remembered. It was raw and honest and broken. "Running? From you?" she asked, her voice bitter. "I think I have been running toward something for the past 3 years, Jake. I have been running toward a life where I don't need you, toward independence, toward self-respect." "But you don't have to run anymore," he said, reaching out again. "I know I made mistakes, terrible mistakes. I lost everything, including you. But maybe that was what I needed to understand what really matters." Emily felt tears burning her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "You think 3 years of me struggling alone is somehow karma for you to learn a lesson? That my pain is your redemption? No, Jake, it doesn't work like that. Life isn't a movie where the man figures out his mistakes and everything goes back to normal." "I'm not asking for everything to go back," he said desperately. "I know that I'm not who you loved anymore, and you are not who I lost. But Emily, please let me help you with the baby, with everything. You shouldn't have to do this alone." The anger rose in her then, hot and fierce and necessary. How dare he? "You want to help me now?" she said, her voice rising slightly. "After you ignored my calls, after the divorce, after you fought me for every penny in court, after you made it clear that your career was more important than I would ever be, now you want to help?" "I was a fool, Emily. I was blind and arrogant, and I deserve your anger. I deserve everything you are saying to me," he replied, and there was such genuine remorse in his voice that it made her chest hurt. "It doesn't matter what you deserve," she said, more quietly. She placed her hand on her belly, feeling the flutter of the baby moving inside her. "This baby is not your responsibility, Jake. This baby is my future, my reason to keep going." She paused, gathering strength. "I need to believe that I can survive without you. I need to know that I am strong enough." "Then let me prove that I can be worthy of a second chance, not as your husband, but as a friend, someone who cares about you." Emily looked at this man who had once been everything to her, and she felt the weight of complicated emotions. She wanted to hate him, but she couldn't quite manage it. She wanted to let him in, but she was terrified of what that would cost her. "I can't, Jake," she finally said, and the sadness in her voice was absolute. "I appreciate that you have changed, I really do, but I have something more important than us now. I have my baby and my future, and right now that is all I can handle." As she walked past him toward the parking lot, Jake stood frozen, understanding finally that love was not always enough, that sometimes the greatest act of love was letting someone go. She had moved on, and he had to learn to accept that, even if it meant living with his regrets forever. But as Emily drove away into the night, neither of them knew that the biggest shock was still coming.
The unexpected arrival. 3 days had passed since Jake returned to his hometown, and he could not stop thinking about Emily. He told himself to leave, to go back to his empty apartment in the city, to accept that she had moved on, and that there was no place for him in her new life, but his feet would not carry him away. His heart would not allow him to abandon her again, not this time. He found himself driving past the diner multiple times, watching her through the windows as she worked. She moved with such quiet determination, such grace, despite the obvious physical toll her pregnancy was taking. He saw how her hand frequently moved to her lower back, how she rested between shifts, how other waitresses seemed to care for her with a protective kindness that suggested she had built a small family here at this diner. Jake finally decided to do something constructive. He used the last of his savings and connections to research apartments in the area. He found a small house for rent just a few blocks from where Emily lived. He convinced himself that he was doing this for business reasons, that he wanted to start fresh in his hometown, but deep down he knew the truth. He was staying for her.
On the evening of the fourth day, Jake sat at the counter of the diner, nursing a cup of coffee. He had been coming here every evening, hoping to see Emily during her shift, to catch her eye across the room and let her know, through his presence alone, that he had not given up, that he was trying to be better, to show her through consistency and genuine care that maybe second chances were possible. Emily emerged from the kitchen and froze when she saw him. Her face hardened and she turned to walk in the opposite direction, but her shift supervisor called her over to take his order. She approached with visible reluctance, her jaw tight, her eyes deliberately avoiding his gaze. "What do you want, Jake?" she asked, her voice clipped and professional. "Just coffee," he replied softly. "And maybe to talk?" "We have nothing left to say to each other," she said, turning away. "Emily, please," he said, reaching out, but not quite touching her. "I am staying in town. I rented a place. I want to be here for you, not as a romantic interest, but as someone who cares." Emily stopped walking. Her shoulders tensed, and she turned back to face him with an expression of frustration and confusion. "What are you doing, Jake? Why are you making this harder? This is not fair to me." "I know," he said. "I know I have no right to ask for anything, but I am not asking for your forgiveness or your love. I am just asking to be here." Before Emily could respond, the diner door burst open and a man walked in. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair and an arrogant expression that immediately reminded Jake of his younger self. The stranger scanned the diner until his eyes landed on Emily, and he grinned widely. "There you are, beautiful," he called out, moving toward her. He was about to embrace her when he noticed Jake sitting at the counter. "Who is this?" he asked, his tone immediately possessive. "This is an old friend," Emily said quickly, her voice strained. "Jake Williams. This is Mark Davis." Jake extended his hand toward Jake with a challenging smirk that did not reach his eyes. Jake recognized the gesture for what it was, a power play, a territorial marking. Mark clearly sensed that there was history between Jake and Emily, and he wanted to establish dominance. Jake shook his hand firmly, meeting Mark's gaze with his own steady look. Neither man looked away first, and the tension between them became suffocating. "So you are the millionaire ex Emily has mentioned," Mark said with a cruel laugh. "She told me how you abandoned her, how you chose money over love. Sounds like you're a real piece of work, buddy." Jake felt his face burn, but he remained silent. He deserved this judgment, deserved this man's contempt. Emily placed her hand on Mark's arm nervously. "Please do not do this, Mark. Not here. Not now." Mark's expression softened immediately when he looked at Emily, and he pulled her close, kissing the top of her head. "Do not worry, beautiful. I am just making sure this guy understands where his place is. Emily and our baby are mine now. We are going to be a real family. You got that?" he said, looking back at Jake. Jake felt something break inside him, watching Emily lean into Mark's embrace, watching her avoid his eyes. He realized in that moment that he had been foolish to think there could be anything between them, that Emily had moved on, that Mark was the father of her child, that this was her new reality. Before anyone could speak further, Emily winced and grabbed her side. Her face went pale and she leaned against Mark for support. "Emily, what is wrong?" Mark asked with sudden concern. "I do not know," she gasped. "I felt something sharp, pain in my abdomen." Her legs buckled, and Mark caught her as she began to collapse. Jake jumped from his bar stool and rushed toward them. "We need to get her to the hospital," he said, his voice urgent and commanding. "I've got her," Mark snapped, but his eyes betrayed his panic and uncertainty. "Get the car now," Jake ordered, with the authority he once used in boardrooms. "Nobody argue with me. She is in danger, and we need to move." Something in his tone, something in the confidence of his command, made Mark comply. He fumbled for his keys while Jake carefully helped Emily toward the door. Her face was twisted in pain and fear, and all Jake could think about was that she needed help, that her baby needed help, that nothing else mattered. As they rushed her to the car, the three of them bound together by crisis and concern, nobody noticed the irony. Nobody predicted how the next hours would change everything. The truth revealed. The hospital waiting room felt sterile and cold as Jake and Mark sat in anxious silence. Neither man spoke, but the weight of their complicated feelings hung heavy between them. Emily had been rushed to the emergency room 2 hours ago, and they had been given no updates. A nurse had mentioned something about possible preeclampsia, and they were monitoring both mother and baby, but nothing concrete, nothing reassuring. Mark sat with his head in his hands, occasionally running his hands through his hair in frustration. He seemed genuinely terrified, and Jake found himself feeling sympathetic toward this man, despite the jealousy burning in his chest. Mark clearly cared for Emily, even if his territorial behavior suggested deeper insecurity. Finally, a doctor emerged and approached them. Both men stood immediately. "The good news is that Emily is stable," she said with a gentle smile. "The baby is also doing well at this stage. We caught the preeclampsia early enough that with medication and close monitoring, she should be able to carry the pregnancy to term." "Thank God," Mark breathed out, visibly relaxing. "But we are going to need to keep her overnight for observation," the doctor continued, "and she will need to reduce her stress and physical activity significantly. This means no more working night shifts, no standing for long hours. She needs rest and proper care." Mark nodded immediately. "I will take care of her. I will handle everything." As the doctor walked away, Mark looked at Jake with an expression of genuine concern and something else. Something that looked like regret. "Look, I know I came across as a jerk before," he said quietly. "I wanted to make sure you understood that Emily was not alone, that she had someone who cared about her. But the truth is, I have not been the partner she deserves. I have been selfish and immature." Jake listened, surprised by this confession. "Emily and we were never really together, not in the way she deserved," Mark continued. "I was there when she needed someone, and I stayed, but mostly for my own reasons. I liked having her in my life, but I was never committed to staying for the long term. And when she told me she was pregnant, I panicked. I said I would be there, but I was not ready for that responsibility. I wanted to be a father, but I was not ready to be the man she needed." "What are you saying?" Jake asked, his heart beginning to race. "I'm saying that she deserves better than what either of us gave her," Mark replied, looking directly at Jake. "And I think maybe I always knew that you were the one she really loved. No matter how much she tried to move on, no matter how much she told herself that she was over you, I could see it in her eyes. Sometimes when she talked about you, I could see the love still there." Before Jake could respond, Emily called for them. Both men hurried to a room where she lay in the hospital bed, looking small and vulnerable despite her strength. The monitors beeped steadily around her, showing her vitals and the baby's heartbeat. Mark went to her side immediately, taking her hand and kissing her forehead. "I was so scared," he said. "I know," she replied, squeezing his hand. "But we are going to be okay. We are going to get through this." Then her eyes found Jake standing in the doorway, and something passed between them. A recognition, a deep and unspoken understanding. "Can I have a moment alone with Jake?" Emily asked gently. Mark looked between them and nodded. He squeezed Emily's hand once more and stepped out of the room. Jake approached the bed slowly, hardly daring to breathe. Emily looked up at him, and tears began to stream down her face. "I was so scared. I thought I might lose the baby," she whispered. "I thought everything I had been working for would disappear, and then I realized something in that moment." "What?" she asked him to sit down with her. "That I am strong because I have survived alone. I am strong because I am willing to let people help me. I realized that asking for help is not weakness, it is courage. And I realized that I have been so angry with you partly because I love you." Jake's heart stopped in his chest. "I love you, Jake, and I have never stopped, but I could not let you in because I was afraid of being hurt again. I was afraid of going back to being that abandoned woman who meant nothing to your ambitions." "I am not that man anymore, Emily," he said, reaching for her hand. "This time, I am choosing you. This time, I'm choosing love, and I will spend the rest of my life proving that to you if you let me." Emily pulled him close and they embraced, carefully conscious of the monitors and her delicate state. In that hospital room, surrounded by the sounds of healing machines, a new beginning started to take shape. A second chance born from pain and struggle and the determination of two people who had learned what it meant to truly love. Sometimes the greatest wealth a person could have was not measured in money, but in the redemption of lost love and the courage to try again.